Welcome to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. We're coming to you from the HCC TV studios at Houston Community College. This is a show that will look back over Houston history over the last 50 years or so, and we offer you a new perspective, things you may have not seen on traditional news. Joining me now today is Doug Miller. Doug is the Director of Media Relations and News and Media Relations at Rice University. Thanks for being here on the show.
It's good to be here with you.
Now, you also were on the Chronicle's editorial board. You spent 25 years at CBS affiliate here in Houston, KHOU, the managing editor for the Houston Business Journal from 85 to 93. You worked at KTRH, and then you started in El Paso at KROD AM and KISO FM.
I have a resume that looks like a rap sheet. Yes.
A lot of people ask me this these days, but I must ask you, do you miss the grind of daily news?
No, not the grind. I miss the cream, but I don't miss getting up early in the morning to milk the cow every day. No.
That is one thing I don't miss at all. I miss being able to live somewhat of a normal schedule.
Yeah.
When I wanted to talk to you about, you've had such a historical career. But first, I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you remember, but the first time I met you out in the field was quite some time ago, and it was in Galveston. We covered Mardi Gras.
Is that right?
That's right. And I met you at the hotel bar with everybody else from the news industry. After the story, of course, after the Mardi Gras, we all went back to the hotel bar. I think it was the Galvez or something like that.
Yeah, I used to volunteer for that assignment every year.
That was great because you got to go stay.
It was great. We could stay in a hotel down there, and it was people. Yeah, it was a fun assignment. And the interesting part of it was toward the end, I would write my story in advance. I had it all done.
Oh yeah,
it was all
set.
You knew what the story was. Anyways.
You knew the story down there. Well, you also gave me a piece of advice. I remember you told me you had a tuxedo on, and you said, when I first got in this business, I got myself a tuxedo. I figured I'd use it, so I wear it for times like these. And you were reporting wearing a tuxedo that time.
Yeah, and the great thing is you could get into any door with the tuxedo.
Oh, yeah.
I carried a tuxedo and a handheld radio, and it opened every door imaginable.
Well, it worked for, was his name Alvin for many, many years?
Alvin Van Black, Alvin at night.
13.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your career. You started at El Paso. What was the first big story that you worked on? Do you remember?
Well, in terms of big stories, that was, I started in El Paso, and it was during the Watergate era, and I was a talk show host. Actually, I was 16 years old, and the guy who owned the radio station that I was working at, the only reason I got a job there was because he was cheap. I mean, this guy was so cheap. He starts a radio station, and he refused to pay ASCAP and BMI fees so he could play records. He just set a phone down there, and it was a fairly new format back then. He said, look, we'll just have people call in on the phone, and that's what we'll do to program the radio station. And they would hire anybody off the street.
To host shows.
I was 16 years old. They paid me $2 an hour, and I ended up hosting a talk show during the Watergate era, which was actually pretty good. But that was that long ago. But since then, I mean, you think about all the big stories. I mean, good Lord, there's so many of them. But I mean, I think in terms of national stories, the election recount of 2000, good Lord, a lot of sleepless nights then.
It's funny you mentioned that talk show, and that was your first experience. And people don't realize, they say, well, how can you get on TV and just do this? Well, you practice ad-libbing, and that's like baptism by fire. When you got a live shot and you're just getting the information, you just got to get it on, get it done, and get it on the air.
Right. I used to have a saying when I was probably the best break I ever got was my first real reporting job here in Houston at KTRH as a police reporter, which is a great boiler room in which to learn journalism. But the main thing I brought to it was I had been a talk show host, and I could just talk. You point to me, and I could just talk, and it served me in great stead during breaking news what we call breaking news situations in television. We call them spot news in radio, where there's a fire burning and you have to simply talk. You have to keep
You're
talking
looking at the
no matter
video
what.
and you're having to make up things to say, and have yourself sound logical without making yourself into a fool. Sometimes it doesn't happen all the ways that you want it to do.
And it's so interesting that these folks who spend so much time on the air now, you're people who are on, primetime CNN type shows that are on for an hour every night. You think about all the times that they have to ad lib and how easy it is to get something wrong if you're filling
yeah.
that much airtime. Yeah.
Absolutely. And nowadays, you've got newscasts that are doing blocks of 6 hours of news in
Yeah.
the morning. You know, when you first started, well, KTRH was a little bit different back then. You guys actually covered beats back then.
We did. We
You
did.
had beats. You had reporters dedicated that, so you could really flesh out a story. Nowadays, you might be covering a fire, and then you know, the new Barbie doll being released, and those are your stories for the day.
And you know, the breakdown of that beat system was such a big development in a bad way in journalism. It used to be that, at least at radio stations, at KTRH certainly, at newspapers, there were beats. I covered police. Someone covered City Hall. Somebody else covered the county courthouse. Somebody else covered the federal courthouse, which meant that you developed an expertise in your individual beat. Now, there really aren't beats. There are some specialties. You'll have someone in the newsroom who sort of specializes in certain things. But generally speaking, it's all general assignment,
Right.
which, you know, and it used to be that we'd sit in a press room together. You'd have 4 or 5 reporters competing against each other. And it hit the point that I wasn't doing it for the listeners out there. I was doing it to beat the guy from KPRC
Oh, absolutely,
radio,
sure.
who's Randy Wallace, now working over Channel 26. He and I
Exactly,
were head to
yeah.
head against each other. I was trying to beat him. He was trying to beat me. And that was competitive journalism, and it was a good thing.
Well, there was that competition, but there was also that camaraderie.
There was,
you know?
yeah.
But you didn't want them to get it on the air first. They were your friend after the 5 o'clock live
I
shot.
still remember times when I lost scoops. I was looking at Eric Barajas on TV, and his father Mike and
Yeah.
I worked for competing radio stations, and he beat me on a big story once, and I remember it to this day.
Don't you?
Yes.
It's funny how those things stick with you over time, and other people may just let it go by. Are you? Did you foresee this coming in the news industry? I know when I first got in it, you know, it totally changed by the time I decided I'm done and decided I wanted to do something else. Did you foresee this coming?
I actually
Where we're going?
I thought it was going to be a lot different. I wasn't sure where the news business was going, to be honest, when I got into it. I remember Steve Smith and I, the former anchor at KHOU, he said to me, you know, at some point, you know, he just said, you know, you're probably going to have to end up doing infomercials or something, unlike, you know, and you know, I didn't intend to stay in television that long anyway. So I had no idea where it was going, to be honest. You know, I really didn't know, and of course, nobody predicted the internet coming along and turning everything upside down.
Where anybody could be a journalist, anybody could start a blog, and really nowadays anybody can report if you've got an iPhone and a connection to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, but, and you know this as well as I do, it's not about the tools, it's about the talent.
Right.
Just because you have a typewriter doesn't mean you can write. Just because you have a camera doesn't mean you know how to do television journalism.
Well, you work at a university now. I work at a community college, and one of the things I get across to young students that are getting out there, they'll ask advice, and I said, you know, you've got to be well-rounded. But the first thing, you got to know how to write. You got to know how to shoot, got to know how to edit, but also upload it to the internet and do some social media. Then you're well-rounded these days.
Right.
Back when we were growing up, it was all learning how to write and write well.
Yeah. And I think, you know, toward the end of my career in television, it just wasn't much fun anymore because all of the social media demands. Every time I used to tell people every time some jackass on the West Coast invents an app, we are expected to give him content for it.
Right.
You know?
And that's where it's
and
going.
it just got to the point where it was the social media demands were becoming excessive. And now, you know, social media, there's no money in it. They're giving away the product, which is
Right.
crazy. They got into, you know, television got into a hammer and tong war with the cable TV industry over retransmission rights.
Yeah.
And now they're just giving away the intellectual property to Twitter, to social, to Facebook, to whoever. You know?
Well, I want to take a dip back into your history and one of your favorite stories we talked about. It was a story that some of the viewers may remember. If not, we're going to talk about Houston back around 97, 98. A bribery sting involving the FBI, a number of city council members, throwing a port commissioner. We'll have it all coming up. Stay tuned to The Story Behind the Story. He's Doug Miller. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll be right back.
HCC. So many classes, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. Joining me today is Doug Miller. Thanks for being here. Former journalist and currently with Rice University of Director of Media Relations.
Good to be here.
I want to talk about one of your what you've told me, one of your favorite stories that you covered over the years. I remember this story very well. It's a story that had all the elements for a great trashy TV movie. You had some high-powered attorneys, a who's who across Houston. You had some City Hall council members, current, former, some City Hall insiders, and it was called the Hotel 6 FBI Sting. Tell us about this.
Yeah, okay, this story, and you know, it's amazing to me this is largely forgotten because this was the biggest local political scandal of our time. And you end up with 4 city council members, a port commissioner, and a lobbyist, all indicted. It was an amazing case.
And there were videotapes and audio tapes as well.
Yeah, here's what happened. Okay, so the FBI agent who was responsible for busting Marion Barry in Washington, D.C., he transfers down to Houston. He specializes in corruption cases. He starts asking around who are the crooks in town. And he ends up focusing on Ben Reyes, who was kind of this big figure in Hispanic politics, East End politics.
Had been around for quite some time.
He had been. And they end up setting up an informant who posed as a Mexican financier who was going to put up the money for a convention center hotel. And so they were going to pretend like he was offering bribes to council members in exchange for votes to get the contract. They used a couple of people to get to Ben Reyes, and Ben Reyes jumps in hook, line, and sinker for this whole thing.
Yeah, wasn't he like towards the end of his career, and he was looking to seal his financial future from what I read. And they, it sounded fishy to me because they brought in the company named the Cayman Group, which had a few clues, but he fell, like you said, fell for it hook, line, and sinker.
Right. He was term limits were going to run off a council, and he had nothing to go for. So here he is. He's looking for something, and along comes this what he thinks is a big deal, and he ends up. They end up setting it up with cameras inside hotel rooms. They had videotapes of literally the picture of corruption. A city council member taking a sack full of cash on videotape.
Wow.
They had audio tapes. They had all the. It was a slam dunk of a case, and somehow it was a mistrial. I talked to a couple of the jurors afterward, and I couldn't believe that they had all this evidence. It was just solid. And the guy handed him the $100 bill, and I couldn't tell that it was a $100 bill. And even though the guy sticks it in his pocket and says thanks for the money, come on, But they ended up. It was an incredible case, and like you say, it was right after the O.J. trial, and as I think about those attorneys involved in that case, I told some of the lawyers involved in this, you guys are making the O.J. case look like pikers. I mean, we had Dan Cogdell, Mike DeGuerin, his brother Dick DeGuerin involved, Ramsey, and I'm looking at my notes here, Bob Bennett, Racehorse Haynes.
Yes, amazing.
David Berg even got a little piece of this thing, and Rusty Hardin was representing the city's interests. It was a murderer's row of every best lawyer in the city of Houston, and it was a hell of a case. In the end, the prosecutor was this good-looking guy at a central casting named Mike Atanasio. The funny story, the federal judges, they had a problem. There were so many women from the other courtrooms coming in, like the clerks and so on, because they wanted to stare at this guy. He was a good-looking guy.
Well, we were putting on TV back then every night too.
Well, and they were. It was really a problem. The other judges were telling the federal judge, in this case David Hittner, quit allowing our clerks to come in there. They're not hanging out because they want to hang out in this courtroom. Anyway, but he ended up it was incredible prosecution. Ultimately, Ben Reyes went to prison. He was sentenced to, I believe, 8 years. Betty Maldonado, who was a port commissioner, sentenced to 3. And the others, because of the mistrial, there was another trial, and ultimately nothing happened with them.
Well, this was a convention center hotel that,
Right.
that was brought into this as well.
Right.
And we did mention the port commissioner. You mentioned her just now. But do you remember the role she played in all of this?
Yeah, she was one of the pilot fish.
Okay.
It's kind of you see the way that the FBI operates one of these things. They want to get you. They get to the people around you,
Right.
basically.
Right.
And
well, they brought Ben Reyes' brother in this, which you didn't mention. He was brought into this
Yeah,
as well.
it was a pretty incredible case. But Betty actually they used her to pay people off, and she actually carried money and passed off money to council members. And so she, they had her dead to rights. They had Ben Reyes on camera
Right.
taking the big sack of cash. The others, there were some other issues with, and that was a whole different deal. There was a lobbyist involved by the name of Ross Allen, and the case against him was so flimsy that the federal judge in the case dismissed it immediately after the prosecution rested. There was some pretty ugly stuff that happened there. Ross was gay. He was in the closet before the case started. He told me that the FBI, the government threatened him with exposure. We're going to tell everybody you're
Right.
gay.
Well,
it was an ugly thing.
I'd heard a lot while this was going on. I mean, there was talks of entrapment. The FBI was
Sure.
being too aggressive to go after these folks and putting them in positions where, yeah, why wouldn't anybody take the money? They were
And
trying to prove
especially,
that.
and there were some of the folks like Betty Maldonado. I mean, she was a pretty pliable character, to be honest, I thought in this case. I remember one time she was walking across the street to the federal courthouse, and she'd literally do what you told her to do sometimes. My photographer was half a block away, and he was not paying attention, and we needed to get a picture of her. And so she started to walk across the street, all the other photographers lined up, and I said, Betty, stop right there. And she did. She just stopped and waited for my photographer to go, okay, come on. So Betty was sort of a pliable character in all of this, And again, yeah, it was. A lot of folks called it entrapment.
Right.
Others said that it was that Ben Reyes got his just desserts.
Do you remember how long you covered this? This was a pretty much 5-day-a-week thing.
It was.
11 allowed
was
you to do that.
Full-time job for me. I was sat in a courtroom for 6 solid weeks every day. I didn't even bother going to the TV station. Went straight to the courthouse, did my 6 o'clock live shots, and packaged stuff for the 10 o'clock and went home. I lived in the courtroom for a while. Yeah, it's interesting. These long trials sort of develop their own culture.
Yeah.
People get to know each other. You get to know the judge. You get to know the clerks and so on. You kind of
And they develop a trust with you in a way as well.
Yeah, in the end, and that helped me in the end because I was able to get copies of some of the videotapes.
Right.
As a result of just working the story.
Right.
Which all of us, we saw the videotapes in the courtroom, but we couldn't bring cameras in. After the case was closed, after it was all over with, I knew how to get my hands on some of the tapes simply because I hung out there long enough and figured something out. I was able to get my hands on it
Right.
and put a story on showing some of the guys pocketing cash.
Well, you were the only one, I think, in Houston that was allowed to do that. Yeah, the other stations, I know our station, we were switching people almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, and some stations they would assign, for example, over at KPRC, I believe Phil Archer was. But not every day. Not every day. I simply, KHOU at the time, they gave me the freedom to go down there every single day, and I was there for every single day of the testimony, which was a great thing.
Doug Miller joining us here on The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. When we come back, we're going to talk about the current elections that are about to be coming up here in Houston and also on the national basis, and we'll talk about debates and what the candidates face. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll be back right after this.
I've seen people's lives change just by attending a class at HCC.
Some of them might not have the financial means to go to a four-year university. That doesn't make them any less quote-unquote smart than the kids who go to a four-year school.
HCC is easy to get to. It's easy to apply and easy to become a part of.
It gave me so much confidence.
Once you finish your 2 years there, you can transition into a four-year university or go into the workforce.
It's affordable, it's accessible, it changes lives.
HCC. So many reasons, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis, joined by Doug Miller today, longtime Houston journalist, now with Rice University. Thanks again for being here.
You bet. My pleasure.
We're talking about journalism. We've talked about some of your favorite stories. I want to talk about now the climate in America, which is focusing on several elections. But here in Houston, most importantly, we have a mayoral election, which is a pretty big one. Do you remember when it was this big over your career?
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, you'll get these contests where they're hotly contested. I think you and I both covered the race between Orlando Sanchez
Absolutely.
and Lee Brown,
And then also Bill
which,
White.
Yeah. But the one in which Lee Brown and Orlando Sanchez. I mean, essentially the national parties moved in and took over the campaigns, and that was very hotly contested, more so than this one.
Which was, which has always got me. Houston's supposed to be, especially with City Hall, it's supposed to be bipartisan. But they jump behind it, and you know exactly which side of the aisles. And it's funny watching, with Orlando, we talked about this, about watching how politics play along City Hall and your allies, depending on your party.
Yeah. You know, we ostensibly have nonpartisan elections, but the fact is that, there are Republicans on council, there are Democrats on council. And the way this has generally worked, whenever you have a number of viable candidates for mayor, you end up, let's face it, the November election is usually a de facto primary. And in that primary, Democrats tend to pick one Democrat who will emerge into the December runoff, and Republicans pick one Republican or one Republican-favored candidate for the December runoff. And the two of them face each other, and this is a Democratic city, so the Democratic candidate wins. I'm generalizing there. I mean, you had Anise Parker and Gene Locke. Gene Locke, a Democrat, but he was the one who was backed by Republicans who voted in the runoff. You know, that's kind of the scenario that we have. And so, you know, when people ask me, and I've been saying this for months now, who's going to win, who's going to be our next mayor, I said, well, it's going to be Sylvester Turner. And the reason I say that is not because of any preference or any sort of thing like that. The problem is that since we have had term limits, we have never had an incumbent mayor ousted from office.
Right. It's always the incumbent's always run.
The incumbent always wins.
Yeah.
And even if there's a challenge, you get one Democrat, one Republican-favored candidate in November, and then we go to December, and the Democrat-favored candidate wins.
Well, even with last time, we had to have the runoff, and you had King and Turner again, you know, going up against it, which we could have a repeat of that again this year.
And King came so close. He came within 3,990 votes of winning that election. But you notice he didn't position himself as a Republican, even though he's backed largely by Republicans.
Right.
He positioned himself as an independent. You ask him what party he was from, he'd say, well, you know, I'm kind of discussing with both of the parties, really, blah, blah, blah. You know, Republican, last time we had a Republican mayor was in the 70s. It was Jim McCon. Just hasn't happened since then.
Yeah, no, and they've had some challengers. You know, I thought at one time Sanchez was a viable challenger, especially with his success at City Hall. And then King had and then of course Turner had run for mayor so many other times.
Yeah.
I mean, hard to believe. 95, I think, was his first time running for mayor.
He was in danger of becoming a perennial candidate.
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason it was so close the last time around. Why Bill King came so close in that race. Yeah, you know, when you think back over the past, the past umpteen years, I think one of the biggest changes come about is, okay, the introduction of term limits. But now what we've got is term limits have been changed. It used to be 3 terms of 2 years each. So what you had there, now it's 2 terms of 4 years. It used to be if somebody decided to run for mayor, okay, so someone wins for mayor. Joe Smith is the mayor. Okay, Joe Smith for the first 2 years, the honeymoon's still there, doesn't build much of a record. Nobody's going to run against him after that. Now, let's say you want to run against Joe Smith, and you're thinking, you know what? It's been 3 years since he's been mayor. He's got a bet. Should I run him next time? Well, you know what? I can wait another 2 years, and then I don't have to run against an incumbent. So as a practical matter, you get elected the first time, you got 6 years as mayor.
Yeah.
Well, now it's different with the 4-year term limit. Because I think what's happening is we're getting people who just aren't going to wait. And I think we're going to see a lot more divisive, contested races for mayor and for city council as a result of these 4-year terms.
after this next four-year term, which you don't think you think Sylvester will be back in office?
I think, barring a scandal, I think it's very tough for any of those candidates to defeat him. I moderated a debate between the four major challengers. You know, I think there are issues out there that they could grab onto. I think that trash. I hear people talking about trash. When you talk
all the time.
you talk about the mayor's race is not about, you know, abortion. It's not about, you know, what Trump is tweeting or anything you're talking about. It's about basic city services. It's about crime. It's about traffic.
The firefighter issue.
Yeah, you know, but mostly it's a lot about city services.
Right.
And when you don't pick up people's trash, they get ticked off. That they can see. And I think that is an issue. Instead, they're talking about corruption, which is something that, I don't know, City Hall insiders might know about or whatever, but I just don't think that one is really getting any traction.
You mentioned debates. I want to talk to you about debates because most recently TSU had the Democratic presidential debate for the candidates for president. Let's talk about how our debates are run these days. And you worked at Channel 11 KHOU setting up debates. What's going on nowadays as opposed to the way you guys used to do it?
I think it's largely, you know, the cable TV debates, you know, you got two candidates and you got these massive, or two panelists, two or three panelists, and you've got this massive group of, you know, candidates on bleachers, you know, stacked up there. That's a whole different challenge. And boy, oh boy, the whole challenge of having to wrestle control of that, you know, when they're trying to step on each other, everything else. You know, I learned a long time ago from watching Greg Hurst, who was an anchor over at KHOU. I worked with a lot of people on debates. I've literally done dozens of televised debates. Greg just simply, when the time ran out, he wouldn't let him finish it. Thank you very much. That's it. He strictly enforced it. He ran it like a judge running a courtroom,
which was refreshing. You don't see that much happening.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you have to do it. You know, we used to, you know, the preparation for these debates is pretty. You can do it well or you can do it badly, and I've been seeing. You know, some of these debates, and I question how much preparation went into them. You know, we used to hold meetings beforehand, try to come up with there's a whole process that I eventually came up with to come up with the right questions for these debates. And you got to work on that. That's what you got to work on.
Well, we see them happening now. We see a lot more of them, and they certainly seem to get the ratings on cable news, so we'll be seeing it in the future. Doug Miller, KHOU, we worked together briefly for a while. I enjoy having you here, and glad to hear you're over at Rice. And thanks for being here on the story.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure, Todd. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for joining us here on the show. We will see you again. Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you again next time.